have to do with the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So if you see the word axis, think about dominoes or cascades, or this is the multi-step event. So the hypothalamus is going to tell the anterior pituitary to do something, and it's going to release a hormone that's going to act on different other endocrine glands to tell them to make a different hormonal response. And then the nervous system is the autonomic nervous system branch for short-term response to stress and threats of homeostasis. The nervous system can override normal endocrine system. So in day-to-day, no emergency, endocrine is controlling many things, but like fluid volume or heart rate. But in an emergency, the autonomic nervous system has the ability to supersede that, override that, and then use the endocrine system to help prepare the body for fight or flight. Here, your example is blood sugar. So normally we're going to maintain blood sugar less than 100, and that is the endocrine's normal job between insulin and glucagon, maintaining somewhere 70 to 90-ish milligrams per deciliter in your blood. But if we go into this fight or flight response, then we're going to need more fuel for our muscles and our brain. So the autonomic nervous system will override the endocrine and allow blood sugar levels to rise so that we have a constant flow of fuel for the active muscles and tissues during the fight or flight response. This is why when we have chronic stress, so again, a acute stress would be a dog chasing you down the road when you are trying to play in your yard or something, and you get scared, and then either you fight the dog or you run away from the dog, and then everything is over. But when you have chronic stress, which we often call like psychological stress, bills, relationships, school, all of that stuff that is not managed in an acute way, we can see that as a risk factor for elevated blood glucose levels, because you're experiencing this stress constantly, but we're not using that glucose in our blood. So it's just kind of accumulating there because we're not really fighting anything. We're not really fleeing anything. So if you feel chronically stressed, we do want to include some kind of activity, exercise or otherwise, to help release some of that build up from the chronic stress and protect your blood sugars and cortisol levels and things like that. All right, so let's go through these organs of the endocrine system. So I have put them into these categories, endocrine only. So these are, I don't want to say pure endocrine glands, but that's their only job in the body, is to make a hormone. And remember, hormones do not have ducts. They empty directly into the blood or lymphatic fluids. We have neuroendocrine glands. So these are glands that are going to have equal roles in the nervous system and the endocrine system. Then we're going to have endocrine exocrine glands. These are glands that make hormones, but then they also make other stuff that they secrete through the exocrine glands. And then we have these secondary endocrine organs. So they're organs that have a primary job outside of the endocrine system, but they also make a hormone. All right, so your primary endocrine organs are, and as part of your lab, you will want to be able to identify these bodies through pictures for your lab practical exam. We have already, when we talked about the nervous system before, talked about the pineal, the hypothalamus, and pituitary gland. So these are all living here in your brain and part of the nervous system as well. We have your thyroid gland at the base of your neck. It's kind of shaped like a butterfly. And then embedded in the back side of it, we will have parathyroid glands. We have your thymus gland. It overlies your heart here and your mediastinum. We have adrenal glands that sit atop and near your kidneys, but are not related to the kidneys. We have your pancreas that sits deep or posterior to your stomach. And then in your pelvic region, you will have either ovaries or testes. So let's look at these a little bit more. So you will have pictures like this where you will need to identify the structures as part of your lab practical exam. Your 6 endocrine only glands are the adrenal cortex. Remember, really important that we really don't ever answer any questions as adrenal gland. We answer them as adrenal cortex, the endocrine only gland, and the adrenal medulla, which is a nervous system structure. We have the anterior pituitary in your brain, which is different. So again, the adrenal gland, put the little star by this, the adrenal gland and the pituitary gland, we really never use those structures because we have two parts to the adrenal gland, which are two separate glands, as the anterior pituitary is different from the posterior pituitary in function and structure. With the parathyroid glands, pineal, thyroid, and placenta, which is the temporary organ of pregnancy. So here's the picture. So here's your kidney. Here's your adrenal gland. Here's the medulla, this little pink triangle in the middle. That's part of the nervous system. This is what we're talking about in this system right here. The endocrine only is the adrenal cortex. It does have three different layers. The deep layer, zona reticularis, the middle layer, zona fasciculata, and the outer layer, zona glomerulosa. I like to use little silly things to remind me, and so I use Good Fight Rocky because I don't know, when I was teaching or learning anatomy, Rocky was a big movie. So GFR is just telling us from outside in, glomerulosa fasciculata reticularis. Some people say go fight run or something like that. Whatever helps you remember it. All right, your pituitary gland. So your pituitary gland is this gland right here. It hangs down from the stalk. This is your hypothalamus here in your brain. It hangs down from the stalk called infundibulum. We learned that last semester. And so it is kind of suspended. And if you remember, it sits in a little bony cradle called the sella turcica in your brain. So it is super important, so important that not only does it have the skull bones to protect it, but it also has an extra little bony cradle. So you know the anterior pituitary gland is going to make a ton of really important hormones that we're going to learn about. So here again, hypothalamus, and this is just blowing up this. The anterior is, of course, towards the front, and the posterior pituitary is towards the back. The anterior pituitary is an endocrine only gland. The posterior pituitary is a neuroendocrine gland. The anterior pituitary makes a lot of hormones. We're going to learn 6. It has previously been called the adenohypophysis. So if you see that word, that means anterior pituitary. I will often abbreviate it as APG, anterior pituitary gland, or PPG, posterior pituitary gland. Because the posterior pituitary gland does not make any hormones. It's an odd little endocrine structure because it doesn't actually make any hormones at all, but it stores hormones made by the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus will trigger through nerves the posterior pituitary to release these hormones when it needs it. So hypothalamus is going to be pulling those strings. Posterior pituitary is just going to, it's like a closet. It's just a place to store stuff. Okay, so we talked about the thyroid. That's this pinkish reddish thing here at the base, shaped a little bit like a butterfly. And then on the back, so not related, these parathyroid glands are on the posterior thyroid, and they are embedded into that thyroid. We have the pineal gland here, this little pea-sized gland at the posterior of the brain. And then if you've never seen a placenta, this is what one looks like. It's a temporary organ of pregnancy. It is the size and texture of a big steak. Okay, so we talked about this already. Thyroid in the anterior. This structure right here is your voice box, like your Adam's apple. So if you feel on your neck vibration where you speak, and then go inferior and lateral, then you will find the thyroid gland. Pineal, we talked about that, little pea size right here. It makes the hormone melatonin. So I feel like before we even start in our study of the endocrine system, most people have heard of melatonin. So now you know where it's made. And we did talk about this one last semester when we studied the nervous system. it has photoreceptors, so it can sense changes in levels of light, and that's what triggers melatonin. All right, there's your placenta. The placenta is a structure during pregnancy that is the site of oxygen and nutrient exchange between fetal and maternal blood. So baby blood and mommy blood never mixes. The baby blood shows up at the placenta and sends its waste and carbon dioxides through it. And then maternal blood shows up the other side of the placenta and provides oxygen and glucose and nutrients for baby. Okay, so those were the endocrine only structures. Now we're moving into neuroendocrine, and there are three. And you might have already guessed hypothalamus, because it is the main link between nervous and endocrine systems. It is what controls the autonomic nervous system, which includes the sympathetic fight or flight response. The parasympathetic branch, if you remember, is the rest and digest. It's the digestion. And then there's an enteric branch as well. The hypothalamus, this structure right here, is attached to the pituitary here through this little stalk called infundibulum. The posterior pituitary, so this one back here, is neuroendocrine. Remember, anterior pituitary was endocrine only. It makes hormones. Posterior pituitary does not make hormones. It is just a storage place for two hormones made by the hypothalamus. The adrenal medulla is that central part of the adrenal gland that is driven by the autonomic nervous system. It is the adrenal medulla that makes epinephrine, which you have probably called adrenaline in your life. Adrenaline, adrenal gland. See how that makes sense there. The adrenal medulla can secrete its hormone super fast in an emergency because it is directed by a nerve impulse, not a hormone that travels through the blood. So that's why it is neuroendocrine. All right, so now let's look at 6 dual structures. So these have an endocrine function, they make a hormone, and an exocrine function, they make something else. All right, so the pancreas, we have talked about insulin and glucagon being its hormones. That is its endocrine function. But its exocrine function is that it also makes digestive enzymes that empty through a duct, the pancreatic duct, into the small intestine. So just, I know we haven't studied the digestive system yet, but here is your stomach, and then your stomach joins your intestine, like right here. The stomach would be on the other side of this. This little green guy is your gallbladder. And then at the beginning of your small intestine, there is a duct from this pancreas that is going to put digestive enzymes that help break down all types of macronutrients, carbs, fats, and proteins. The gonads, which are known as your ovaries and testes, have an endocrine function. They make sex hormones, right? Estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. You probably are familiar with that. But they also make something else, eggs and sperm, and that is an exocrine function. So we categorize the gonads as dual or endocrine exocrine organs. Your liver has an exocrine function. It secretes bile. Bile is a digestive substance that helps break fat down. We need it for fat metabolism if you eat a high-fat meal. The liver also makes hormones for blood pressure regulation, immune function, and some blood cell formation. Liver, you cannot live without your liver. I know you all probably don't think about your liver very much, but you need to be thankful that it works every day. All right, your stomach, also a major organ of the digestive system, also, and it makes, in the digestive system, it has exocrine function where it makes some mucus to help things kind of slide along and protects the stomach lining. It makes stomach acid, and it makes intrinsic factor, which we'll talk about a little bit more, which is important for blood cells, B12, metabolism. The stomach also makes hormones. So we have some cells within the stomach that we call G cells. So if you think G for gastric, that's our word for the stomach. And they're called enteroendocrine cells. So entero is always going to mean something has to do with the guts and digestive tract. Endocrine, meaning makes hormones. So it's going to secrete hormones that control digestion, that speed up or slow down food moving through your digestive tract. It also secretes some hormones that affect your appetite. Small intestine, much like the stomach, is going to make digestive enzymes, particularly for carbohydrates and fats, and it has an endocrine function, those same kind of hormones that control digestion and appetite. Your kidney, so important, kind of competing with the liver for its main job there. It has an exocrine function that it makes an enzyme that activates hormones in that whole renin, angiotensin, aldosterone, blood pressure mechanism. It also activates the hormone vitamin D. So vitamin D is really misnamed. When it was originally named, they thought it did function more as a vitamin, but it's really a hormone because it is made and travels through the blood and has target glands that it acts on. And the endocrine function of the kidney is to make the hormone erythropoietin that we have talked about previously. And erythropoietin tells your bone marrow to make red blood cells to increase oxygen carrying capacity. But you didn't know all that about your kidney. Okay, and then these last couple slides are the 6 structures that produce a hormone not as their primary function. So their primary function lies in another system outside of the endocrine system, but they also make a hormone. Okay, first is adipose tissue. Remember, this is fat tissue, and we know that fat has a job in storing energy for future use for us, but it also makes estrogen, and that is in male and females. So it makes estrogen and some hormones for hunger and satiety, which makes sense, right? Because if you have a lot of adipose, then it's going to tell you you're kind of full and not make you hungry. If you don't have very much adipose, then it could trigger some hunger, so they'll be eating more. The second one is your skin. The skin makes cholecalciferol, which is the precursor to vitamin D. So when your skin, the epidermis, that's that outer layer, is exposed to the UV rays of the sun, that will trigger the production of this precursor to vitamin D. And like I said before, vitamin D has about 105 functions these days. Seems like every day they're finding something new that it does. We know that it's important for your bone and your immune system, also important for mood. Your heart, its main job is the pump of the cardiovascular system, but its endocrine function is to produce a hormone that controls blood volume and blood pressure, specifically to reduce blood volume and blood pressure. All right, so there's your heart right there. It sits kind of just a little bit off to the left of the center of your chest. It's about the size of your fist. Overlying it is this glandular tissue right here called the thymus. And this is an endocrine organ that makes a hormone that's important for immunity and functions in the immune system. And it is also a lymphatic organ and is going to be the site of maturation of lymphocytes, which are a kind of white blood cell that we'll learn about when we study. Interesting about the thymus is that it is most active during childhood, so in young childhood, because starting in adolescence, it will start to atrophy, which means it kind of shrinks up a little bit, and is not functioning very much at all after age 75, which is why our immunity decreases as we get into old age. Neutrophils are a specific type of white blood cells. So we're going to learn that there are like 5 different types of white blood cells, and neutrophils are the specific type of white blood cell that makes a hormone. And think about this. So it makes a hormone that's going to tell the bone marrow to make more neutrophils. So it's going to respond in bacterial infections. So if it finds a major infection, then it's going to eat up the pathogens or whatever there, but it's also going to send a signal to make more neutrophils, because neutrophils die in the process of fighting infection. So these pinkish kind of thing, those are all your red blood cells. These big ones right here are white blood cells. Specifically, these are neutrophil white blood cells. Okay, and our last secondary function endocrine structure is the uterus. So it is going to be the place that houses the fetus, but also is going to secrete hormones which help maintain the pregnancy. And it also secretes hormones that help prepare mammary tissue to lactate. Okay, so make sure you understand how all these structures work, but also how to find them and label them. There is a PAL image bank, that is the practical anatomy lab, or like the pictures of the structures as part of your lab, that will help you prepare for the lab practical.